drag marks leading from the bay doors to a spot where the concrete had been recently disturbed. Patches that were a different color, as if they'd been poured at different times. He was examining one of these patches when his flashlight caught something metallic embedded in the concrete. Bending down, he realized with a start that it was a wedding ring half submerged in the material. The concrete around it couldn't have been more than months old. Sheriff Jake's voice, urgent now, echoed through the building. "We've got another vehicle coming in." Lights off, moving slow. Garrett hurried back to the front, peering through a gap in the boarded window. A pickup truck, older model Ford, was creeping along the access road with its headlights off. It pulled up next to their patrol cars and stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened and a figure stepped out. Even in the darkness, Garrett recognized him. Billy Joe Turner, a local who lived alone out on a ranch about 10 miles from here. Garrett had always found him odd but harmless. The kind of guy who kept to himself, came to town maybe once a month for supplies. But seeing him here now at 2 in the morning, approaching an active crime scene with his lights off, that changed things. "Billy Joe," Garrett called out, stepping from the building with his hand on his weapon. "What brings you out here?" Billy Joe stopped, caught in the beam of Jake's flashlight. He was a big man, 6'4" and broad, with the kind of strength that came from a lifetime of ranch work. His face was weathered, deeply tanned and creased, making it hard to read his expression. "Saw the light," Sheriff Billy Joe said, his voice a low rumble. "Thought maybe someone was messing around the old station again. You know how kids get." At 2 in the morning, Garrett kept his tone conversational, but he noticed Jake had moved to a flanking position, hand also on his weapon. "That's mighty neighborly of you, Billy Joe. Don't sleep much these days," Billy Joe replied. And there was something in his voice that made Garrett's skin crawl. "Desert's got a way of keeping you up. You know, I need you to step back to your vehicle, Billy Joe," Garrett said, no longer trying to hide his suspicion. "This is a crime scene." Billy Joe didn't move. His eyes, barely visible in the darkness, shifted from Garrett to the rental car, then back. "That's Jennifer's car, isn't it?" The question hit Garrett like a physical blow. "You know Jennifer Walsh?" A slow smile spread across Billy Joe's face, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, I know all of them, Sheriff. Every single one that's come through here. They all stop at the sundown station sooner or later. It's like they're drawn to it like moths to a flame." The interrogation room at the Briggs County Sheriff's Station hadn't seen much use in recent years. Most of the crime in their jurisdiction was straightforward. Domestic disputes, drunk driving, the occasional bar fight. But now at 4:00 a.m., Billy Joe Turner sat across from Sheriff Garrett, the fluorescent lights harsh against his sun-weathered face. Deputy Gonzalez watched from behind the one-way glass, while Jake Morrison stood guard outside. "Let's start simple, Billy Joe," Garrett said, setting a cup of coffee in front of the man. "How did you know the rental car belonged to Jennifer Walsh?" Billy Joe wrapped his large hands around the cup, but didn't drink. "Saw her when she stopped for gas in town yesterday. Pretty thing, traveling alone. You could tell she wasn't from around here. Had that city look about her. You know, all nervous and checking her phone every 5 seconds. And you just happened to remember her name." Rosa at the gas station mentioned it. Said the girl was asking about the fastest route to El Paso. Rosa tried to warn her about driving through the desert at night, but you know how outsiders are. They don't listen. Garrett made a note. Rosa Delgado had worked at the town's only operating gas station for 15 years. She knew everyone and everything that passed through Briggs. He'd need to talk to her. "Tell me about the names on the wall, Billy Joe. Your name's not there, but you know about them, don't you?" Billy Joe's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Don't know what you're talking about, Sheriff. Come on now." Garrett leaned back in his chair, studying the man. "You just told me you know all of them. Every single one that's come through." "That's what you said. Figure of speech, is it? Because I've got 37 names on that wall dating back to 1983. And you've lived out on that ranch since what, 1981? Billy Joe finally took a sip of his coffee. "Lots of people pass through. Desert's a big place. People get lost." "They do," Garrett agreed. "But they don't usually carve their names and the date on a wall before they disappear. And they certainly don't do it in chronological order." For the first time, Billy Joe seemed genuinely surprised. "Chronological order. That's right. Each name appears on that wall in the order they were reported missing. It's like someone's been maintaining a record, adding to it over the years like a guest book almost. Billy Joe was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, almost resigned. "You don't understand, Sheriff. This place, this county, it's not like other places. The desert here, it's hungry. Hungry? My daddy told me stories when I was a boy about the old days before the highway, before the town was properly settled. People would come through following the old cattle trails, looking for a better life out west. But not all of them made it. The desert would take them, sometimes one by one, sometimes whole families. And it wasn't just the heat or getting lost. There was something else out here, something that fed on travelers. Garrett wanted to dismiss this as the ramblings of a disturbed mind. But something about Billy Joe's tone, the matter-of-fact way he spoke, made him listen. The indigenous people knew about it, Billy Joe continued. That's why they avoided this particular stretch of land. Called it the Hungry Valley. When the Spanish came through in the 1700s, they lost 3 expeditions in this area. Just vanished. No bodies, no equipment, nothing. Like they'd never existed. And you believe these stories? I've lived here my whole life, Sheriff. I've seen things, heard things. You know that feeling you get sometimes, like you're being watched? That's constant out here. And every so often, when the conditions are right, new moon, no wind, when the desert goes completely silent, that's when they come. They, the travelers, the ones who stop at the sundown station. Garrett leaned forward. Billy Joe, are you telling me you've seen Jennifer Walsh? Not yet, but I will. They always show up at my ranch eventually. Lost, confused, not remembering how they got there. And I do what I can for them. Give them water, food, a place to rest. But they never stay. Come morning, they're gone. And then their names appear on that wall. You're saying Jennifer Walsh is going to show up at your ranch within the next day or two if the pattern holds, and then what? She disappears again. Billy Joe met his eyes directly. Sheriff, I need you to understand something. I'm not the one taking these people. I'm trying to help them, but there are forces at work here that are beyond my control. Beyond anyone's control. Garrett stood up, pacing to the corner of the room and back. In 23 years of law enforcement, he'd never had a conversation like this. Part of him wanted to dismiss Billy Joe as delusional, maybe suffering from isolation-induced psychosis. But the names on the wall were real. The missing people were real. And now Jennifer Walsh was real. I need you to take me to your ranch, Garrett said finally. Won't do any good. If she's meant to come, she'll come whether I'm there or not. Then you won't mind if we search the property. Billy Joe shrugged. Search all you want. You won't find anything. Never have before. That stopped Garrett cold. We've searched your property before. 3 times. Hello, friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. It wasn't even midnight in the August heat when Sheriff Tom Garrett received a phone call that would forever change his view of the remote areas of Briggs County, Texas. Garrett, who had worn the badge for 23 years in this sparsely populated community in West Texas, thought he knew everything the desert had to offer. Cartel smugglers transporting goods north via backroads, the occasional vagrant lost in the endless miles of scrubland. But an ordinary missing persons report would reveal something far more disturbing lurking beyond his jurisdiction. The call came from Maria Gonzalez, his youngest deputy, who was working the night shift at the station. Sheriff, we got a situation out at the old sundown station on Route 67, she said, her voice carrying an edge of unease that immediately got Garrett's attention. Maria wasn't one to spook easily. She'd grown up in these parts and knew the difference between real trouble and shadows, jumping at nothing. What kind of situation? Garrett asked, already pulling on his boots and reaching for his keys. The sundown station had been abandoned for going on 15 years now, ever since the interstate bypass had redirected most of the traffic away from the old highway. These days, only locals and the occasional lost tourist use that stretch of road. Cody Martinez called it in about 30 minutes ago. Maria continued, says he was driving back from Midland when he saw lights at the station. Thought maybe someone was squatting there. So he stopped to check it out. Found an abandoned rental car with Arizona plates. Driver's door open, keys still in the ignition. No sign of the driver. Garrett frowned as he climbed into his patrol vehicle. The Crown Vic's engine turning over with a familiar rumble. Abandoned vehicles weren't uncommon on these lonely stretches of highway. People ran out of gas, had mechanical troubles, sometimes just gave up on wherever they were headed. But something about Maria's tone told him there was more to this story. "You run the plates?" he asked, pulling out of his driveway and heading toward the station. "That's the thing, Sheriff. The car was rented 3 days ago in Phoenix by a Jennifer Walsh, 28 years old, traveling alone. According to the rental agreement, she was supposed to return it yesterday morning, never showed. The rental company's been trying to reach her all day." As Garrett drove through the silent streets of Briggs, population 2,847, he couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The town was already asleep, porch lights off, not even a dog barking to break the stillness. Beyond the town limits, the darkness became absolute, broken only by his headlights cutting through the night. Out here, the distances between things could swallow you whole if you weren't careful. "I'm heading out there now," Garrett told Maria. "Send Jake to meet me. And Maria, check if we've had any other reports of abandoned vehicles along that stretch recently." "Already on it, Sheriff. And there's something else." Cody said the car's radio was still playing when he found it. The classic country station out of Odessa. Battery should have been dead if it had been running for hours. Garrett felt the first real tingle of concern run down his spine. Details like that, the small things that didn't quite add up. Those were what separated a simple case of car trouble from something more sinister. In his experience, when things didn't make sense on the surface, it usually meant something darker was swimming just underneath. The drive out to the sundown station took 40 minutes on a good day, but Garrett made it in 30, pushing the Crown Vic harder than usual. As he drove, he thought about all the people who'd vanished on these roads over the years. Most turned up eventually, broken down 50 miles from where they'd said they'd be, or deciding to take a detour to visit some roadside attraction. But every now and then, someone would just disappear as if the desert had opened up and swallowed them whole. He'd been deputy himself back in 1996, when the Ramos family had vanished on this same stretch of highway. Parents and 2 kids heading to California from Houston never made it past Briggs County. Their van was found 3 weeks later, half buried in sand after a flash flood 20 meters from any road. No bodies were ever recovered. The official report blamed it on them getting lost and succumbing to the heat, but Garrett had never been satisfied with that explanation. The van's tires had shown no signs of driving through the desert. They'd been clean, as if the vehicle had been placed there. The sundown station finally appeared in his headlights, a monument to better times, now slowly being reclaimed by the desert. The old Texaco sign still stood, though the letters had long since fallen off, leaving only the star. The pumps were still there too, rusted sentinels guarding nothing. And there, parked under the canopy, as if waiting for service that would never come, was a white Nissan Sentra with Arizona plates. Jake Morrison's patrol car was already there, parked at an angle with its spotlight trained on the rental car. Jake stood next to it, hand resting on his service weapon. That particular kind of alertness that came from sensing something wrong, but not being able to name it. Sheriff Jake nodded as Garrett approached. "Cody left about 10 minutes ago, said he had to get home to his family." I got his statement, though. Garrett walked slowly around the Nissan, taking in every detail. The driver's door was indeed open, interior light still on, keys dangling from the ignition. A purse sat on the passenger seat untouched. In the back, a small suitcase and a laptop bag. No signs of a struggle, no blood, nothing to indicate violence. It looked for all the world like Jennifer Walsh had simply stepped out of her car and vanished into the night. "Radio's not playing now," Jake observed, "but the battery's fine. Engine starts right up." Garrett leaned into the car, careful not to touch anything. The radio was set to 95.3, the Odessa Classic Country Station, just as Cody had said. But Jake was right. It was silent now. He noticed something else. The trip odometer showed 347 ME, which would be about right for Phoenix to hear, but the gas tank was still 3/4 full. ASNRA should have burned through more gas than that over that distance. "You notice anything else unusual?" Garrett asked Jake, who'd been his deputy for 5 years and had good instincts. "Yeah, actually." Jake pointed to the ground near the driver's door. "Look at the dirt here." Garrett crouched down, shining his flashlight on the spot Jake indicated. There were footprints in the dust, small, probably a woman's based on the size. They led away from the car toward the station building, but after about 10 FT, they simply stopped. Not like the person had turned around or been picked up, but as if they just ceased to exist mid-stride. Could be the wind covered the rest, Jake offered, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. There hadn't been any wind in days. The dust patterns around the pumps confirmed that. Garrett stood, a chill running through him despite the warm night air. He'd seen a lot of strange things in his years on the force, but footprints that just ended, that was new. He followed the prints to where they stopped, then swept his flashlight in a slow arc across the ground beyond. Nothing, not even disturbed dust to suggest someone had brushed away tracks. "Let's check the building," Garrett said, though every instinct told him Jennifer Walsh wouldn't be inside. The station had been picked clean by scavengers and vandals years ago, leaving only the shell of the structure. The windows were boarded up, the door chained shut, though Garrett noticed the chain had been cut recently, the edges of the metal still bright. They entered carefully, weapons drawn but not expecting trouble. The inside was what you'd expect. The files mostly empty. Just the initial report and then a closure notice saying they were found safe in California, but there's no follow-up, no details about how they were found or where exactly. Garrett felt a chill run down his spine. He remembered the Ramos case clearly, the van in the desert, the investigation that went nowhere. But according to the file, they'd been found safe. "Check the others," he told Maria. 2003 college student, 2011, the Stevens couple. A few minutes passed before Maria responded. "Sheriff, these files all say the same thing. Missing persons found safe. Case closed, but there are no details. And Sheriff, your signature is on all the closure reports." Garrett stared at Billy Joe, who was watching him with something that might have been sympathy. "You're starting to see it now, aren't you?" Billy Joe said quietly. "The way things work here, the way they've always worked. This place protects itself, Sheriff, and sometimes that means making people forget. That's impossible, is it? How many missing persons cases have you worked in your career? Can you remember them all? Can you remember how they ended?" Garrett tried to think, but the harder he concentrated, the more the memories seemed to slip away, like trying to hold water in his hands. He could remember starting investigations, but the endings were fuzzy, indistinct. "What are you?" Garrett asked, his hand moving unconsciously to his weapon. "I'm just a man who's lived here too long," Billy Joe replied. "Long enough to understand that some things are bigger than us. The desert has its ways, Sheriff. It takes what it needs and it gives back what it chooses. Fighting it is like fighting the wind. You'll just wear yourself out." Before Garrett could respond, Jake burst through the door. "Sheriff, we've got a situation. There's a woman walking down Main Street. She matches Jennifer Walsh's description." But he paused, looking troubled. Something's not right about her. Garrett looked at Billy Joe, who simply nodded. "Told you she'd show up. Question is, Sheriff, what are you going to do about it?" The drive back to Main Street took only minutes, but it felt like hours. Garrett's mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything Billy Joe had said. He'd always prided himself on being a rational man, someone who dealt in facts and evidence, but the missing files, the forgotten cases, the impossible patterns, they all pointed to something beyond rational explanation. Main Street was deserted except for a lone figure walking down the center of the road. Even from a distance, Garrett could see it was a woman, matching Jennifer Walsh's description. Late 20s, blonde hair, wearing jeans, and a Phoenix Suns t-shirt. But Billy Joe was right. Something was off about the way she moved. Too smooth, too purposeful, like she was gliding rather than walking. Garrett pulled up alongside her, rolling down his window. "Ma'am, Jennifer Walsh." She stopped and turned to face him, and Garrett had to suppress a gasp. It was Jennifer Walsh. He recognized her from the driver's license photo, but her eyes were wrong. They were completely black. No whites, no iris, just endless dark pools that seemed to pull at something deep in his chest. "I need to go home," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "Can you help me get home?" "Where's home, Jennifer?" She tilted her head as if considering the question. "Phoenix. I live in Phoenix, 4247 East Camelback Road, apartment 23B. The address was right. Garrett had seen it on her rental agreement, but the way she recited it like reading from a script sent chills down his spine. "What happened to you, Jennifer? Where have you been?" "I stopped at the station, the old station for gas, but there was no gas, just the dark. So much dark. And then the voices. They said I could go home if I left something behind." "What did you leave behind?" She smiled then, and it was the most terrifying thing Garrett had ever seen. Everything that mattered. The Briggs County Hospital wasn't equipped for psychiatric cases, but it was the only option they had. At 5:00 a.m., Jennifer Walsh sat on the examination bed, staring at the wall with those disturbing black eyes, while Dr. Sarah Chen tried to conduct a basic medical evaluation. Sheriff Garrett watched from the doorway, Jake beside him, both men struggling to process what they were witnessing. "Her vitals are normal," Dr. Chen reported, though her voice carried a note of confusion. "Blood pressure, heart rate, temperature, all within standard ranges." But she paused, looking at her instruments. "I can't get a proper pupil response because of the condition of her eyes. And Sheriff, her blood work is showing some very unusual results." "Unusual? How?" "There are trace elements I can't identify, minerals that shouldn't be in human blood. And her white cell count is off the charts, but she shows no signs of infection or illness." Dr. Chen pulled Garrett aside, lowering her voice. "Tom, in my 15 years of practice, I've never seen anything like this. Whatever's wrong with her, it's not medical. At least not any medicine I understand." Jennifer suddenly spoke, making them all jump. "The desert knows your name, Sheriff Garrett. It's known your name for a long time." Garrett approached her slowly. "What do you mean? You were supposed to be one of us back in 1996, but you chose differently and the desert remembered." "The Ramos family," Garrett breathed, memories suddenly flooding back with painful clarity. He had investigated their disappearance. He had found their van, but there had been something else, something he'd forced himself to forget. "I saw them, didn't I? After they disappeared, they came back just like you." Jennifer's black eyes focused on him. "You helped them go home. You drove them to the county line and told them to keep driving. You told them never to come back. And then you forgot, because forgetting was part of the bargain." "What bargain?" "The one your predecessor made?" "Sheriff Williams. He made a deal in 1983 when the killings were threatening to expose the truth. 1 person per cycle, taken cleanly. No investigation, no questions. In exchange, the town prospers. The desert stays quiet, and those who know the truth are allowed to forget." Garrett felt his legs go weak. Sheriff Williams had been his mentor, the man who trained him, who'd recommended him for the position when he retired. "You're saying Williams knew he was part of this? Every sheriff has known. They all make the same choice eventually. Protect the many by sacrificing the few. Strangers passing through, people who won't be missed immediately. It's a small price for peace. And Billy Joe, the keeper, the one who maintains the boundary. He processes them, helps them transition. Some go home like the Ramos family. Others, the desert keeps them." Before Garrett could respond, his radio crackled, Maria's voice urgent and frightened. "Sheriff, you need to get back to the station now. We have a situation." The drive back to the station was tense. Jennifer sat in the back of the patrol car, humming tunelessly to herself. The Billy Joe's stories, Jennifer's condition, the forgotten cases, the deal Sheriff Williams had apparently made. His deputies listened in stunned silence, but Garrett could see they believed him. How could they not, with the evidence literally writing itself on the walls around them? "So what do we do?" Jake asked. "We can't just let this continue. People are disappearing. 1 person per cycle," Maria said quietly. "According to what Jennifer said, that's 12 people a year, over 40 years. That's 480 people," Garrett finished, "at minimum." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of that number settling over them. Nearly 500 people vanished into the desert, and everyone had just forgotten. Jennifer spoke from where she stood in the doorway. "It's not murder. Not really. We continue to exist, just differently. The desert doesn't destroy. It transforms into what?" Garrett demanded. "Into part of itself. We become the voices in the wind. The shadows that move when there's no sun. The feelings you get when you're alone in the wasteland. We're still here, Sheriff. All of us waiting. Waiting for what? For the compact to be broken. For someone to refuse the bargain. But that's never happened. Every sheriff makes the same choice because the alternative is worse. What's the alternative? Jennifer's black eyes seem to deepen, pulling at the light in the room. The desert takes what it needs. Without the compact, without the controlled feeding, it would take everything. The town, the county, everyone in it. It happened before to the settlements that came before Briggs. They're out there still, buried under the sand. Empty places where entire communities just stopped. Garrett felt the weight of decision pressing down on him. Continue the cycle. Sacrifice strangers to save his community and live with that knowledge. Or break the compact and risk everything and everyone he'd sworn to protect. There has to be another way, he said. But even to his own ears it sounded desperate. There is. Billy Joe's voice came from behind them. They spun around to find him standing in the entrance to the station. But like Jennifer, he was changed. His eyes weren't black, but they held depths that hadn't been there before, as if the desert itself was looking out through them. But it requires a different kind of sacrifice. What kind? A willing guardian. Someone who chooses to stand between the desert and the town, not feeding it, but appeasing it. It's been done before, long ago, before the compact. The indigenous peoples had their ways. One person marked by the desert serving as a bridge. It's a lifetime commitment, Sheriff, and it changes you. You become something between human and other like you. Billy Joe shook his head. I'm just a keeper. I maintain the status quo. A guardian is something more. Something that can actually communicate with the force that inhabits this land, negotiate with it, maybe even find a way to coexist without the feeding. And if I choose this, then you disappear. As far as the town knows, Sheriff Tom Garrett vanished in the line of duty. Jake here becomes sheriff. Life goes on, but you remain out there keeping watch, keeping the balance. Garrett looked at his deputies, at Jennifer with her black eyes, at Billy Joe, who'd spent 40 years facilitating disappearances. He thought about his wife died 3 years ago from cancer, his daughter living in Houston, who barely called anymore. He thought about the oath he'd taken to protect and serve. How do I know you're telling the truth? Billy Joe smiled sadly. You don't. But the sun's about to rise, Sheriff, and when it does, if no choice has been made, the desert will make it for you. And I promise you, its choice will be worse than anything you can imagine. Outside, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten. Garrett could feel something building, like atmospheric pressure before a storm. The very air seemed to thicken, charged with an energy that made his skin crawl. The first rays of sunlight were creeping across the desert when Sheriff Tom Garrett made his decision. He stood outside the sundown station, the place where it had all started, with Billy Joe on one side and Jennifer Walsh on the other. His deputies waited by their patrol cars, unwilling witnesses to something that defied everything they thought they knew about the world. Once you agree, there's no going back, Billy Joe warned one final time. You'll be bound to this land forever. Not dead, but not truly alive either. Existing in the spaces between, keeping the balance, Garrett had already made peace with it. In the past hour, he'd written letters, one to his daughter, one to the department, one to whoever would eventually take his place. He'd transferred his cases to Jake, updated his reports, set his affairs in order. If he was going to disappear, at least he'd do it properly. Tell me what I need to do. Billy Joe led him into the desert, away from the station to a place where the ground formed a natural depression, like an ancient crater. Jennifer followed her movement, still unnaturally smooth. At the center of the depression, the sand was different, finer, almost crystalline, catching the morning light in ways that hurt to look directly. This is one of the thin places, Billy Joe explained, where the barrier between what is and what might be is weakest. The desert's power is strongest here. If you're going to make the transition, it has to be here. What about Jennifer? Can she be saved? Once you become the guardian, you'll have the authority to release those who've been taken. Some, like Jennifer, can be restored. Others have been gone too long. They've become too much a part of the desert to ever be fully human again. Garrett nodded, understanding. He stepped into the circle of crystalline sand, immediately feeling the change. The ground beneath his feet seemed to pulse with a heartbeat not his own. The air shimmered, and for a moment he could see them, all of them. The missing people, the vanished travelers standing in ranks that stretched back through time. Spanish conquistadors, indigenous warriors, settlers, modern tourists, all watching, waiting. I offer myself as guardian, Garrett spoke, not knowing where the words came from, but knowing they were right. I stand between the hunger and the world. I will be the bridge, the keeper of the compact, the one who watches. The desert responded. It started as a whisper, voices in languages he didn't understand but somehow comprehended. They spoke of loneliness, of vast stretches of time, of a consciousness older than human memory. The desert wasn't evil, Garrett realized. It was simply alien, operating by rules that predated human understanding of good and evil. The sand beneath his feet began to move, spiraling upward, encompassing him in a cocoon of glittering particles. He felt his body changing, every cell being rewritten with new purpose. It didn't hurt exactly, but it was overwhelming, like trying to download the entire history of the land directly into his brain. He saw it all. The first peoples who'd walked these lands, who'd learned to coexist with the entity that dwelt here. The compact they'd made, trading stories and memories for safe passage. How that compact had been broken when the Europeans arrived, unable or unwilling to understand what they were dealing with. The years of hunger that followed, entire expeditions vanishing, settlements disappearing overnight. Until finally, in 1983, Sheriff Williams had negotiated a new compact. A darker one, but one that at least kept the peace. But Garrett also saw possibility. The desert didn't need bodies. It needed connection, acknowledgement, respect. It fed on human essence, because that was the only interaction it had learned in centuries of fear and misunderstanding. As Guardian, he could teach it different ways, better ways. The sand cocoon burst apart and Garrett stood transformed. He looked the same on the surface, but his deputy's expressions told him otherwise. There was something other about him now, something that marked him as existing between worlds. Jennifer Walsh gasped, her black eyes flickering, showing hints of blue beneath. "I can feel it," she said. "The pull is lessening." Garrett reached out, not physically, but with senses he didn't have before, touching the part of Jennifer that the desert had claimed. They had resisted at first, reluctant to give up what it had taken. But Garrett persisted, offering, 40 years I've been waiting for someone strong enough to do this," he said. 40 years of facilitating horror, because I didn't have the courage to find another way." "You did what you had to do," Garrett told him, understanding now the burden Billy Joe had carried. "You kept it from being worse. What happens to me now? You're free. The desert releases you from your obligation. Live your life, Billy Joe, what's left of it." As the day progressed, things began to settle into a new pattern. Jake took temporary charge of the department, reporting that Sheriff Garrett had suffered a medical emergency and was being transferred to a specialized facility in Houston. It was a lie that would become truth in the official records. Another disappearance explained away, but this time by choice rather than necessity. The Sundown Station would be demolished, the ground salted, and marked as environmentally hazardous to keep people away. The wall of names would be photographed, documented, then destroyed. The families of the missing would receive closure where possible, mysterious tips leading to the recovery of remains, answers to questions that had haunted them for years. But Garrett himself would remain, walking the thin places between civilization and wilderness, maintaining the new compact. He could feel the desert's presence constantly now, vast and patient and curious. It wasn't malevolent, just profoundly different, operating by laws older than human civilization. And slowly, carefully, he was teaching it new ways to interact with the world. 3 months later, Deputy Jake Morrison, now Sheriff Morrison, drove out to the edge of the county on a night patrol. He parked at a scenic overlook, stepped out of his vehicle and waited. After a few minutes, a figure emerged from the darkness, familiar but changed, existing at angles that didn't quite match reality. "How are you holding up, Tom?" Jake asked. "It's not Tom anymore," the figure replied, voice carrying the sound of wind through canyons. "That person is gone. I'm something else now. The Guardian, the bridge, the one who watches." "Do you regret it?" The Guardian considered. "I miss being human. I miss simple things, coffee, sleep, the feeling of rain. But I see so much more now. The desert has shown me wonders, Jake. Civilizations that rose and fell before humans ever came here. The dreams of the land itself, and I know that what I'm doing matters. No one else will disappear. The compact holds. The state police were here last week, asking questions about the missing persons cases suddenly being solved. Let them ask. The evidence will support whatever story makes sense to them. The desert knows how to keep its secrets. Jake nodded, then pulled out a thermos. Maria thought, "You might want this coffee black the way you used to like it." The Guardian reached out, took the thermos, held it, but didn't drink. Couldn't drink? Not anymore. But the gesture, the warmth of it, the smell, these were human things. Anchors to what he used to be. Important to remember, even if he could no longer partake. "Tell Maria thank you, tell her. Tell her to look after the town. The desert is quiet now. But there are other places where the boundaries are thin. Other entities that might take interest. Stay vigilant, we will." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out over the vast expanse of desert, now painted silver by moonlight. Somewhere out there, Jennifer Walsh was back in Phoenix, living her life, remembering only a car breakdown and a helpful sheriff who'd gotten her home safely. Billy Joe Turner had sold his ranch and moved to Oregon, seeking green forests and rainfall, as far from the desert as he could get. The town of Briggs continued on, its people unaware of how close they'd come to becoming another empty place in the wasteland. "I should go," the Guardian said finally. "The desert is restless tonight. There's a storm coming in from Mexico, and storms always make it hungry. I need to be there to remind it of our bargain. Will I see you again, perhaps, on nights like this when the boundary is thin? Or maybe you'll just feel me, a presence watching over the county, keeping the balance. Either way, know that I'm here always." With that, the Guardian turned and walked back into the desert, his form becoming less distinct with each step, until he was just another shadow among shadows, another whisper of wind across the sand. Jake watched until he couldn't distinguish his former boss from the landscape itself, then got back in his patrol car and drove toward town. The desert stretched out behind him, vast and patient and no longer hungry. For the first time in 40 years, the sundown station stood truly empty. No longer a trap for unwary travelers, but just another ruin being slowly reclaimed by the sand. And somewhere between the seen and unseen, between the human world and something far older, the Guardian kept watch, maintaining the new compact, ensuring that the desert's hunger would never again be fed with human lives. In the years that followed, Briggs County prospered in quiet ways. People still disappeared occasionally. The desert was vast and unforgiving, even without supernatural intervention. But the pattern was broken. The wall of names remained only in photographs, evidence of a darkness that had been overcome. And sometimes, on particularly dark nights, when the moon was new and the desert held its breath, residents would report seeing a figure standing at the edge of town, tall and still, watching over them with eyes that held the depth of centuries. They called him the Guardian, though most didn't really believe he existed. Just another desert legend, another story to tell around campfires. But Jake Morrison knew better. Maria Gonzalez knew. A handful of others who'd been there that night knew. And that was enough. The compact held. The desert remained quiet, and somewhere between the human and the infinite, Tom Garrett stood eternal watch, a guardian at the threshold, ensuring that the darkness of the past would never return to claim the future. Sarah Walsh, she'd gone back to her maiden name after the divorce, stood at the edge of the sundown station ruins, a bouquet of desert wildflowers in her hand. She didn't really know why she came here every year on the anniversary. She had no memory of what had happened that night 5 years ago, just vague impressions of car trouble and a helpful sheriff who'd gotten her home safely. But something drew her back. Some need to acknowledge a debt she couldn't quite define. "Thank you," she said to the empty desert, feeling slightly foolish. "For whatever you did, for bringing me home." The wind picked up, swirling around her, and for just a moment she could swear she heard a voice in it, familiar but strange, carrying notes of vast patience and protective watchfulness. "You're welcome, Jennifer. Live well." She turned, startled, but there was no one there, just the desert stretching endlessly under the afternoon sun. But as she walked back to her car, a different one now, bought specifically for its reliability, she felt a sense of peace she couldn't explain. Whatever had happened here, whatever had almost claimed her, it was over. She was free. Behind her, invisible to human eyes, the Guardian stood watch as he would for all eternity. The desert whispered its ancient songs around him, no longer hungry but never truly satisfied, held in check by will and bargain and sacrifice. The compact held. The balance was maintained. And in the vast spaces between what was and what might be, Tom Garrett kept his eternal watch. Guardian of the threshold, protector of those who pass through the hungry lands, forever standing between the darkness and the light. Sheriff Rita Sandoval had been patrolling the rugged terrain of Presidio County for 18 years, but she never quite got used to this desolation. The landscape of southwest Texas stretched endlessly. Jagged mountains. Finally went to check it out this morning, thinking maybe a snake den or something, but then I saw it. They walked for 10 minutes through sparse grass and prickly pear cactus before Louise stopped pointing ahead. At first, Rita saw nothing unusual, just more of the same rocky ground. Then she noticed the darkness between two limestone boulders, an opening that seemed to swallow light. Moving closer, she could see it clearly, a hole about 4 feet in diameter, edges worn smooth as if by frequent use. The opening descended at an angle into the earth, disappearing into blackness. And there, just visible in the shadows, she could make out what Louise had described. A collection of toys scattered on a ledge about 10 feet down. A stuffed bear, a plastic truck, a doll with blonde hair. All of them looked new, clean, recently placed. "There's more," Louise said quietly. "Shine your light down there to the left." Rita pulled out her mag light and directed the beam into the hole. Her breath caught. On the cave wall, someone had drawn pictures, children's drawings in what looked like chalk or crayon. Stick figures holding hands. A house with smoke coming from the chimney. A yellow sun with a smiley face. "Jesus Christ," Rita whispered. "How long has this been here?" The hole itself could be natural. Lots of caves in this area, but those toys, those drawings. "Sheriff, my grandson has that exact same truck. They sell them at the Walmart in Fort Stockton. Can't be more than a year old, that model." Rita radioed for backup, getting Deputy Miguel Hernandez and Deputy Clayton Barnes to head their way. Then she began documenting the scene with her phone camera, careful not to get too close to the unstable-looking edge. "Louise, has anyone gone missing around here recently? Any families talking about lost kids?" "Not that I've heard, but you know how it is out here. People keep to themselves. And with the pandemic, folks are even more isolated than usual." While waiting for her deputies, Rita examined the area around the hole. The ground showed signs of disturbance, not recent, but repeated over time. Paths through the grass that weren't game trails, a pattern of movement that suggested regular visits. Miguel arrived first, his young face serious as Rita briefed him. Clayton showed up 15 minutes later, with rappelling gear from search and rescue. "They'd need to go down." "I'll do it," Clayton volunteered. He was the most experienced with rope work, having spent 5 years with Parks and Wildlife before joining the Sheriff's Department. They secured the rope to Clayton's truck, double-checking every connection. Rita and Miguel held secondary lines as Clayton descended into the darkness, his helmet light creating dancing shadows on the cave walls. "It opens up." His voice echoed from below. "Jesus, Sheriff, it's big down here. Really big." "What do you see?" "The toys are on a natural shelf. There are more further back. Dozens of them." And hold on, a pause. "There are passages, multiple passages leading off in different directions. This isn't just a cave. It's a whole system." "Come back up," Rita ordered. "We need a proper cave team for this." As Clayton ascended, Rita's radio crackled. Dispatch was forwarding a call from Border Patrol. They'd picked up unusual seismic activity in the area over the past week, consistent with underground movement, possibly excavation. Rita felt the pieces clicking together in her mind, forming a picture she didn't want to see. Underground tunnels near the border, children's toys, recent activity. "We need to search every database for missing children," she told Miguel. "Not just Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Chihuahua. Go back 6 months. You think someone's taking kids? I think someone's moving kids. The question is where and why these toys are here." They sealed the scene and headed back to the station. Rita called in favors, getting assistance from state police, FBI, and Border Patrol. By nightfall, she had a command post set up in the station's small conference room. Maps spread across the table, laptops humming with search queries. The results were disturbing. 17 children had gone missing within a 200-mile radius over the past 6 months. Most were assumed runaways or custody disputes, but the pattern, when mapped out, showed a clear cluster around the Rio Grande Valley. Dr. James Raw, the county's only doctor and Rita's friend since high school, stopped by with coffee and sandwiches around 9:00 p.m. He took one look at the map and whistled low. That's a lot of missing kids, Rita. Too many. And these are just the reported ones. How many more haven't been reported? Immigrant families afraid to contact authorities. Kids nobody's looking for. What's your theory? Rita rubbed her tired eyes. Best case scenario, it's a way station for human trafficking, and the toys are, I don't know, meant to keep kids calm while they're being moved. Worst case, she couldn't bring herself to say it. James studied the photos from the cave. These drawings, they're too neat, too organized. Kids in distress don't draw like this. What do you mean? I mean, these look like drawings kids make when they're happy, comfortable, safe even. He pointed to one particular drawing. See this? That's a family portrait. Mom, Dad, 3 kids, even a dog. The proportions are good. The colors are bright. This wasn't drawn by a traumatized child. Before Rita could respond, Miguel burst through the door. Sheriff, we've got another one. Another hole. Rancher found it about 8 miles from the first site. And Sheriff, there are fresh footprints, small ones, child-sized. They raced through the darkness, a convoy of patrol vehicles with lights flashing. The second site was on the property of Tom Rodriguez, another longtime rancher. This hole was smaller, partially concealed by a cluster of ocotillo plants, but the footprints were clear in the dust. Multiple sets, all child-sized, leading to and from the opening. Tom, when did you find this? About 2 hours ago. Heard voices? Thought it was a legal crossing. Came out to check, but nobody was here. Just these tracks in that hole. I swear I heard children laughing, Sheriff, but there's nobody around for miles. Rita shone her light down the second hole. More toys, more drawings, but also something else. Blankets relatively clean, water bottles. Packages of food, crackers, fruit pouches, juice boxes. Someone was providing for children down there. We need to go in, Rita decided. Full team now. They assembled at dawn. Rita, her deputies, 2 cave rescue specialists from Terlingua, and a border patrol tactical unit. The plan was to enter both holes simultaneously in case the tunnel system connected, and someone tried to flee. Rita led the team into the first hole, rappelling down into darkness that seemed to press against her from all sides. The cave opened into a chamber about 30 ft wide and 20 ft high. The walls were covered in drawings, hundreds of them, layered and overlapping. In the center of the chamber, toys were arranged in neat circles as if children had been playing and simply stepped away. Sheriff, one of the cave specialists, called, "You need to see this." He was standing at one of the tunnel entrances, his light illuminating something carved into the stone. Words in English, but arranged strangely. The children of the earth return home below the sun's burning eye, where the forgotten wait, where the lost are found. What the hell does that mean? Miguel asked. Before anyone could answer, they heard it singing. Children's voices echoing from somewhere deep in the tunnel system. The sound was hauntingly beautiful and absolutely wrong, because according to their heat sensors, there was no one else down there. The singing stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving only the sound of dripping water and their own harsh breathing. Rita's team stood frozen in the chamber, lights sweeping the tunnel entrances, searching for the source of those impossible voices. Could be an echo from the surface, Clayton suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. They were 60 ft underground. No surface sound could carry that clearly. We proceed as planned, Rita ordered, though her hand rested on her service weapon. Team 1 with me down the north tunnel. Team 2 takes the east. Constant radio contact. The north tunnel was narrow at first. They'd found similar chambers, similarly arranged, all showing signs of recent habitation by children. But no children, no adults, no signs of violence or struggle. Just empty spaces that should have been filled with life. They spent the next 3 days mapping the tunnel system. It was extensive. 7 chambers connected by natural and modified passages, with 4 separate entrance-exit points, spread across 15 square miles. Someone had spent years, possibly decades, creating this underground network. But for what purpose? The FBI brought in their child crimes unit, led by Special Agent Patricia Reeves, a stern woman with 20 years of experience in trafficking cases. She reviewed everything Rita's team had found, interviewed the ranchers, analyzed the drawings and toys. This doesn't fit any trafficking pattern I've seen, she admitted to Rita on the 4th day. Traffickers don't make kids comfortable. They don't let them play and draw, and they certainly don't create elaborate underground playrooms. So what are we looking at? I honestly don't know, but we need to find these children. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Rosa Delgado, who ran the only grocery store in the town of Presidio, called Rita with a strange observation. "Sheriff, you know how I keep track of what everyone buys, helps with ordering and such. Well, I've noticed something odd. Every 2 weeks, regular as clockwork, someone's been buying large quantities of children's food. Juice boxes, snack packs, cereal, always paid in cash. Always the same man who, don't know his name. Anglo, maybe 60, 65, quiet. Drives an old white van. But here's the strange thing. He doesn't have any kids. Lives alone out past Shatter somewhere." Rita felt her pulse quicken. "When does he usually come in?" "Should be tomorrow if he keeps to pattern. Usually around 10 a.m. The next morning, Rita and her team were in position. She was in the store with Rosa pretending to shop. Miguel and Clayton were outside in unmarked vehicles. The FBI team waited on the outskirts of town. At 10:15, the white van pulled up. The man who got out was exactly as Rosa had described. Older, weathered, with the kind of deep tan that came from a lifetime in the desert. He moved with purpose, filling his cart with children's supplies, just as Rosa had said. Rita followed him at a distance as he paid and loaded his van. Then, as he pulled out, she radioed her team. They followed him carefully, staying well back on the empty roads. The van turned off the highway onto a dirt track that, according to their maps, led to an abandoned mining camp. They gave him a 15-minute head start, then followed. The camp, when they reached it, looked long deserted. A collection of rusted trailers and collapsed wooden structures. The van was parked next to what had been the mine office. Rita and her team approached carefully, weapons drawn. Through a window, they could see the man transferring supplies into boxes. Rita gave the signal, and they entered simultaneously through front and back doors. "Sheriff's Department. Hands where we can see them." The man didn't run, didn't reach for a weapon. He just stood there looking at them with tired eyes and said, "I wondered when you'd come." The children said, "You would." His name was Samuel Brennan, and according to his driver's license, he was 67 years old. He sat in the interrogation room, calm and cooperative, as Rita questioned him. "Where are the children, Samuel?" "Safe. They're always safe, and that's the whole point." "Safe from what?" Samuel looked at her with those tired eyes. "From above, from the burning, from what's coming. I need you to be more specific, Samuel. Where are the children right now?" "Below, where they've always been, where they need to be until it passes." Rita felt her frustration building. "Samuel, we found the tunnels. We know children have been there. If you're protecting them, if you think you're helping them, then help us understand." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "May I have some paper and a pen?" Rita provided them, and Samuel began to draw. Not a child's drawing, but architectural plans. Detailed schematics of the tunnel system, including sections Rita's team hadn't found yet. "I didn't build this," he said as he drew. "It was already here when I found it in 1973. I was prospecting, looking for silver. Instead, I found them. The children, the first group, 12 of them living in the tunnels. They'd been there since 1918, they said, hiding from the influenza. Their parents had put them down there to keep them safe, then died above. The children survived, grew up down there, had children of their own." Rita stared at him. "That's impossible. You're talking about 100 years ago. I know how it sounds, but it's true. They showed me the graves. Their parents buried in a chamber deeper than you've gone. They showed me their records kept on the walls. Generations of children hiding from disasters above. Influenza, Dust Bowl, nuclear scares in the 50s. And now what? Now the sickness above again. The isolation, the fear. The children know when it's time to go below. They always know. Samuel, where are these children now?" "They'll come back when it's safe. They always do. A few months, maybe a year. Then they return to their families above, and nobody remembers they were gone. It's how it's always been." Rita leaned back, trying to process what she was hearing. Either Samuel was completely delusional, or he was telling a truth too strange to accept. "The missing children," she said. "The 17 we've identified. Are they in the tunnels?" "They're safe," Samuel repeated. "Their families think they're missing, but they're not. They're waiting. When the danger passes, they'll return, and the memories will adjust. People will think they were visiting relatives or at camps, or simply misremembered the timing. The underground protects its own." Before Rita could respond, her radio crackled. It was Amy Chen, the cave specialist, and she sounded shaken. "Sheriff, we've found something. Another chamber deeper than the others. You need to see this." Rita left Samuel in holding with a guard and raced back to the tunnel system. Amy Chen was waiting at the first entrance with two other specialists, their faces pale in the afternoon sun. "We found it by accident," Amy explained as they descended. "One of my team noticed an air current that didn't match our mapping. There's a concealed entrance in the third chamber. Someone covered it recently, but not well enough." They moved through the now familiar tunnels, past the chamber with the 6 beds to where Amy's team had set up lights. What had looked like a solid wall was actually carefully fitted stones that could be removed. Beyond was a narrow passage that required them to crawl for nearly 50 FT before it opened into a vast cavern. Rita's breath caught. The space was enormous, easily the size of a football field with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. But it wasn't the size that stunned her. It was what filled it. Homes. Dozens of small, simple dwellings built from stone and salvaged materials. They lined the cavern walls in tiers connected by carved steps and walkways. It looked like a PBLO village hidden away from the world above. "My God," Miguel whispered beside her. Amy led them down a carved staircase to the cavern floor. Up close, the craftsmanship was remarkable. Each dwelling was unique but followed a similar pattern. 1 or 2 rooms, small windows, wooden doors salvaged from who knows where. Some had gardens, tiny plots of earth where pale plants grew under battery-powered grow lights. "Sheriff, one of Amy's team called over here. They'd found what appeared to be a common area, a large circular space with benches carved from stone. The walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them spanning decades. Children playing in the tunnels, families gathered for meals, groups posed formally like school pictures." Rita studied the photos, her mind reeling. The oldest was sepia-toned, probably from the 90s. The elderly woman rose slowly to her feet. "Sheriff Sandoval," she said, and Rita started. "We've been expecting you. Samuel told us you would come eventually." "Who are you?" "My name is Eleanor. I've been the keeper here for 43 years, since my mother passed the responsibility to me and her mother. Before her and hers before that." Eleanor smiled. "Would you like some tea?" The children were just finishing their afternoon lesson. Rita felt like she'd stepped through the looking glass. "Pam, these children, their families are looking for them." "No, dear, they're not." "Not really. The families above have forgotten, as they always do when the children come below. It's part of the protection. When danger threatens, the children who hear the call come to us. Their families remember them being elsewhere, visiting relatives at camp, staying with friends. When the danger passes and the children return, the memories readjust. No trauma, no loss, just continuity." "That's not possible." Eleanor's smile was patient. "Sheriff, you've walked through tunnels that shouldn't exist, seen a community that survived in secret for over a century. Perhaps your definition of possible needs expanding." One of the children, a girl of perhaps 10, tugged at Eleanor's sleeve. "So, Eleanor, is it time to go back? Is the sickness over?" "Not yet, Mika, but soon. The signs are improving." Rita knelt down to the girl's level. "What's your name?" "Isabella." "Isabella Morales." Rita's tablet showed an Isabella Morales, age 10, reported missing from Las Cruces 3 months ago. "Isabella, do you want to go home?" The girl looked confused. "I am home. This is my other home. My up-above home is waiting for me. Mama thinks I'm with Tia Rosa in Houston. When the sickness is done, I'll go back and Mama will remember me coming home from Tar Rosas." "How do you know what your mother thinks?" Isabella shrugged. "We just know the underground tells us." Rita stood, her head spinning. She looked at Eleanor. "I need to understand this. All of it." Eleanor nodded. "Then come, let me show you the heart." She led them deeper still through passages that seemed to predate any human construction. The walls here were smooth, almost glass-like, and gave off a faint, phosphorescent glow. The air hummed with an energy Rita could feel in her bones. They emerged into a chamber that defied explanation. The walls were crystalline, reflecting and refracting light in impossible ways. In the center was a pool of water so clear it seemed like air. And beneath the surface, something pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm. "This has been here since before humans walked this land," Eleanor said softly. "The indigenous peoples knew of it, respected it, understood its purpose. It's alive in a way, connected to the earth itself, to the cycles of danger and safety, sickness and health." It calls to the children when danger approaches, offers them shelter, keeps them safe, and their families are protected from the grief of loss. The entity, for lack of a better word, adjusts reality just enough to prevent suffering. The children are safe below, the families are at peace above, and when the danger passes, everything returns to normal. Rita stared at the pulsing light beneath the water. The missing children reports will resolve themselves. They always do. Check your records from past years. How many missing children cases simply closed with child found safe and no follow-up? How many families suddenly remembered their child had been somewhere else all along? This is insane. This is survival, Eleanor corrected. For over a century, this place has protected the most vulnerable during times of crisis. The 1918 flu pandemic, the Dust Bowl, the Cold War, and now this current plague. The children who are sensitive to the call come below. Live safely until the danger passes, then return to lives that seamlessly continue. And you've been doing this for 43 years. Someone has to. Someone always has to stay to guide them to maintain the boundary between worlds. Eleanor looked tired suddenly. It won't be much longer now. The signs are clear. Perhaps another month, then the children can return. Rita made a decision that went against every protocol, every rule she'd sworn to uphold. I need proof. I need to see one of them return. Elilana smiled. Then choose one. Any child here. Watch them return. See how the world adjusts and then decide what you'll do with this knowledge. Rita chose Maria Santos, the 7-year-old whose self-portrait she'd found on the bedside table. According to the missing persons report, Maria had vanished from an El Paso park, while her mother was briefly distracted by Maria's younger brother. That had been 6 months ago. The case had gone cold despite extensive searches and media coverage. Maria will be ready to return in 3 days. Eleanor explained the danger cycle is completing for her. Her mother's grief has been suspended. She believes Maria is safe but unreachable, staying with relatives in Mexico due to border complications from the pandemic. Her mother doesn't have relatives in Mexico. Rita had checked. She does now in her memory. The underground provides what's needed for the story to hold. Rita spent those 3 days in a surreal routine. She returned to the surface, filed vague reports about ongoing investigation, and tried to process what she'd witnessed. She also did something else. She researched, going through decades of missing children cases in the Southwest. She found exactly what Eleanor had suggested. Hundreds of cases that had resolved mysteriously. Families suddenly remembering alternate explanations. Children reappearing with no clear documentation of where they'd been. She also researched Samuel Brennan. His story checked out. He'd been a prospector in the 1970s, had several claims in the area, but after 1973 he'd largely disappeared from public records, only surfacing occasionally to buy supplies. For 47 years, he'd been the surface guardian of the underground community. On the appointed day, Rita returned to the tunnels with only Miguel, whom she trusted completely. Eleanor was waiting with Maria, who was dressed in clean clothes, her small backpack decorated with cartoon characters. "She's ready," Eleanor said simply. They walked to one of the tunnel exits, emerging near Highway 67 about 2 meters from the main road. A car was waiting, Samuel's white van. "He'll drive her to El Paso," Samuel explained. "Leave her at the park where she disappeared. Her mother will be there. She's been drawn to return there every day at the same time, though she doesn't know why. And Maria will just walk up to her. And her mother will remember that Maria has been with relatives, but now she's back. The story will make sense to her, even if the details are fuzzy." Rita insisted on following at a distance. She watched Samuel's van enter El Paso, watched him park near the park. Through binoculars, she saw Maria get out, wave goodbye to Samuel, and walk toward the playground where a woman sat on a bench watching a younger child play. The woman's reaction was extraordinary. She looked up, saw Maria, and her face lit up with joy but not surprise. She opened her arms and Maria ran into them, both of them laughing. Rita could see them talking animatedly. Maria apparently telling her mother about her adventure with the relatives. Over the next hour, Rita watched as they played in the park. Got ice cream. "They'll come back, take my place, and I'll finally rest. What about Samuel? He'll continue his work above, maintaining the fiction, providing supplies, watching for danger signs. He's trained others too. There's a network of surface guardians across the Southwest. We're not the only underground sheriff. There are others, All connected, all protecting. Rita made her decision. The investigation is closed. Officially, we found an old tunnel system, probably used by smugglers, now abandoned. No evidence of current activity. Eleanor nodded. That's wise. The world above isn't ready to know. Maybe it never will be. As Rita prepared to leave, Elilana handed her something. A smooth stone from the crystal chamber, glowing faintly with that impossible light. Keep this, Elilana said. If the danger ever becomes too great, if you ever need shelter, hold it and think of us. The underground protects those who protect it. Rita took the stone, its warmth pulsing in her palm. Back on the surface, life continued. The pandemic waned, restrictions lifted. The world began to heal. The tunnels were officially sealed, marked as dangerous and off-limits. Samuel was quietly released. No charges filed. The FBI closed their investigation, finding no evidence of trafficking or kidnapping. But Rita kept the stone, and sometimes late at night, she would hold it and feel that pulse, that connection, to something ancient and protective beneath the earth. She would think of Eleanor and the children, waiting in their impossible sanctuary for the next crisis, the next call to shelter those who needed it most. 3 years passed. Rita had almost convinced herself it had all been some shared delusion when the stone in her desk drawer began to glow brighter. That same day, reports started coming in. A new disease spreading fast, more dangerous than before. Children in Presidio County began disappearing again. But Rita didn't investigate. She knew where they were, knew they were safe. She drove out to the original entrance one night, the stone burning warm in her pocket. The hole had been officially filled with concrete, but the concrete was cracked now, pushed aside from below. A figure stood beside it, not Eleanor, but a young woman Rita recognized. Isabella Morales, now 13, her eyes carrying wisdom beyond her years. Eleanor is tired, Isabella said simply. She trained me for 3 years. I'm the new keeper. You're just a child, Isabella smiled. And it was Eleanor's smile, ancient and knowing. The underground doesn't measure time the way you do, Sheriff. Down there I've lived lifetimes, learned everything Elilana knew and more. The children need me now. She turned to go, then paused. Your deputy, Miguel, his daughter Rosa. She's heard the call. She'll come to us tomorrow. Don't let him worry. She'll be safe. And when this danger passes, she'll return. Rita wanted to protest, to warn Miguel to stop this cycle. But she felt the stone pulse in her pocket and understood this was beyond human law, beyond human understanding. It was older, deeper, more fundamental than anything she could fight or change. The next day, Miguel's daughter, Rosa, age 9, disappeared from their backyard. Miguel was frantic, but within hours he became calm, mentioning that Rosa was visiting her grandparents in San Antonio. Had been planned for weeks. Nothing to worry about. Rita said nothing. She filed no report. She kept the stone in the secret. 6 months later, when the new plague had burned itself out, Rosa returned. Miguel picked her up from the bus station, completely accepting her story of a long visit with grandparents who didn't exist. Life continued. Rita retired early, officially citing stress and burnout. She bought a small ranch near the tunnels, close enough to watch, far enough to avoid suspicion. Sometimes she would see Samuel's van, now driven by someone younger, delivering supplies to hidden entrances. Sometimes on very quiet nights, she could hear singing from beneath the earth, voices of children safe in their secret sanctuary. She became part of the network Eleanor had spoken of. The surface guardians who knew the truth and kept the secret. There were more than she'd expected. Dr. Rohr, it turned out, had known for years, had treated children who'd returned with no memory of their time below. Rosa at the grocery store knew, had been supplying the underground for a decade. Even some of the ranchers knew, had known for generations, keeping the secret as their families had before them. The world above continued its cycles of crisis and calm, danger and safety. And below, in tunnels that shouldn't exist, protected by something older than human memory, the children found shelter when they needed it most. Rita would sometimes meet other sheriffs, other law enforcement officials, who'd stumbled onto similar mysteries in their jurisdictions. They would share looks of understanding, but never speak of it directly. Some secrets were too important, too necessary to ever fully reveal. In her final report filed away in the classified sections that no one would ever read, Rita wrote, "Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. Some protections work only in shadow and silence. The children of Presidio County are safe. They have always been safe. They will always be safe. The underground ensures it. To whoever reads this, if anyone ever does, don't investigate further. Don't seek the tunnels. Don't disturb the guardians. What exists below exists for a reason. And that reason is more important than truth, more important than law, more important than understanding. The children know when to hide. We've forgotten, but they remember, and thank God for that. She sealed the report, locked it away, and never spoke of it again. But on certain nights, when the wind was just right and the desert was silent, she could hear them singing below. The children of the underground, safe in their eternal sanctuary, waiting for the next call, the next crisis, the next need for shelter. And Rita would hold the glowing stone, feel its warmth, and know that some forms of protection transcended anything she'd sworn an oath to uphold. Some guardians worked in daylight with badges and guns. Others worked in darkness with older, deeper tools. Both were necessary. Both were real. And in Presidio County, both would continue their watch above and below for as long as the danger cycles continued, which, if history was any guide, would be forever. 5 years after her retirement, Rita received a letter with no return address. Inside was a photograph. Dozens of children in what was clearly the underground chamber, all smiling, all safe. In the center sat Isabella, now 18, her arms around two smaller children. On the back of the photo, in careful handwriting, the 100 red-year flood came last month. 14 children heard the call. They're safe. They'll return when the waters recede and the danger passes. Their families believe they're at emergency shelters in Austin. Thank you for understanding. Thank you for protecting the secret. The keepers. Rita burned the letter but kept the photo, hiding it with the stone that still pulsed with underground warmth. She knew that somewhere in hidden places across the Southwest, other retired lawmen and women kept similar photos, similar stones, similar secrets. The network of silence held. The children remained protected. And beneath the harsh Texas earth, in chambers that existed outside normal understanding, the cycle continued. Forever and always the underground endured. The morning of June 15, 1995, began with an intensity that Sheriff Frank Delqua associated with the troubles in Jefferson County. The humidity in East Texas during the summer months was stifling enough on normal days, but there was something peculiar in the air that morning, a suffocating, oppressive heaviness. Frank had been sheriff for 12 years, and during that time, he had developed a sense for when the county's dark past would resurface. Jefferson County sat in the far eastern corner of Texas, where the state bled into Louisiana's bayou and swamps. It was a land of dense, Frank asked, already reaching for his hat. Emma hesitated, which wasn't like her. Bones, Sheriff. Human bones. A lot of them. The drive to the plantation took 30 minutes on roads that hadn't been properly maintained in years. Frank's patrol car bounced over ruts and potholes, Spanish moss from overhanging oaks, occasionally brushing the windshield like ghostly fingers. Emma followed in her own vehicle, and they'd called Deputy Carl Washington to meet them there. Carl was the only black deputy in the department, a fact that still raised eyebrows in certain parts of Jefferson County, where some folks acted like the civil rights era had never happened. Samuel Cooper was waiting at the rusted plantation gates, his weathered face pale beneath his farmer's tan. Samuel was one of the few black landowners in the county, his family having somehow managed to hold on to their small farm through Reconstruction, Jim Crow and everything that came after. He'd been clearing brush from his property line when he'd made the discovery. "Morning, Sheriff," Samuel said, his voice steady, but his hands trembling slightly. "Wish I could say it was good to see you under better circumstances. Show me what you found, Samuel." They walked through waist-high grass and brambles, past the collapsing mansion with its broken windows, staring like dead eyes to a field that had once grown cotton. The morning sun was already brutal, and sweat soaked through Frank's uniform within minutes. About a 4 mile from the house, near a massive oak tree that had to be at least 200 years old, Samuel stopped. "Was clearing some fallen branches from that storm last week," he explained. "My dog started digging at the base of the tree. Wouldn't stop. When I went to see what had him so worked up, he pointed to a depression in the earth, partially excavated." Frank knelt beside the hole, pulling on latex gloves. Even from the surface, he could see them. Human bones yellowed with age, partially buried in the dark soil. But it wasn't just one skeleton. As his eyes adjusted to what he was seeing, he realized there were multiple sets of remains, jumbled together in what looked like a mass grave. "Jesus Christ," Emma whispered behind him. Carl arrived as they were establishing a perimeter, his expression grim as he took in the scene. "How many you think?" he asked Frank. "Hard to say without excavation, but based on what's visible, at least a dozen, maybe more." They called in the state forensics team, and by noon the plantation was swarming with investigators, archaeologists, and crime scene technicians. The mass grave was carefully excavated, revealing horror upon horror. 23 bodies in total, all showing signs of violence, broken bones, skull fractures, and in several cases, vertebrae damage consistent with hanging. Dr. Patricia Chen, the state forensic anthropologist, worked through the afternoon heat, carefully cataloguing each set of remains. Based on the degradation in soil conditions, these bodies have been here for approximately 130 to 140 years, she reported to Frank as the sun began to set, painting the sky the color of old blood. That would put the time of death somewhere between 1855 and 1865. The Civil War era, Frank said, though he'd already suspected as much, or just after Reconstruction was particularly violent in East Texas, from what I understand. Frank understood all too well. Jefferson County's history during and after the Civil War was written in blood and terror. The official records were sanitized, speaking vaguely of civil unrest and political tensions. But the oral histories, the stories passed down in certain families, told of night riders, lynchings and massacres that were never investigated, never punished. That evening, Frank sat in his office going through historical records, looking for any mention of missing persons or mass deaths from that period. Emma and Carl helped, pulling dusty volumes from the courthouse basement, many of which hadn't been opened in decades. It was Emma who found the first clue. "Sheriff, look at this," she said, holding out a yellowed newspaper from 1865. The headline read, "23 Freedmen Vanish from Harrington Plantation." The article was brief, as such articles tended to be when the missing were formerly enslaved people. It mentioned that 23 workers who had remained on the Harrington plantation after emancipation had disappeared one night in September 1865. The plantation owner, Colonel Josiah Harrington, claimed they had left to seek opportunities elsewhere. No investigation was conducted. "Colonel Harrington," Carl said, his voice tight. "That would be Judge Harrington's great-great-grandfather." They continued searching, finding more pieces of the puzzle. Tax records showing the Harrington plantation had prospered remarkably after the Civil War, despite most plantations failing. Death certificates for several Harrington family members that listed unusual causes, accidents, sudden illnesses, unexplained falls, a pattern of tragedy that seemed to strike the family every generation. It was near midnight when Martha Reeves arrived at the station. Martha was 83 years old, the unofficial historian of Jefferson County's black community, keeper of stories that had never made it into official records. She walked with a cane, but her mind was sharp as a razor. "Heard you found them," she said without preamble, settling into a chair across from Frank's desk. "About time someone did. You know about the bodies?" Martha's laugh was bitter. "Sheriff, every black family that's been in this county more than 50 years knows about those bodies. We call that tree the Judgment Oak. Our grandparents, they knew what happened there. Saw it happen, some of them. Tell me," Frank said, pulling out a recorder. "I need to know everything." Martha was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts or perhaps her courage. September 15th, 1865. The war had been over for months, but Colonel Harrington, he wasn't ready to accept that his property could just walk away. Those 23 souls, they'd stayed on after emancipation, working for wages, trying to build something. But the colonel, he had other ideas. She paused, her weathered hands gripping her cane. He invited them to a meeting, said he wanted to discuss sharecropping arrangements. They gathered under that oak tree just after sunset. That's when his men surrounded them. Some say the colonel accused them of theft. Others say he claimed they were planning an uprising. Didn't matter what the excuse was. They hanged 13 of them from that tree, shot the other 10 when they tried to run, and nobody reported it. Martha's look was withering. To who? The sheriff was the colonel's cousin. The judge was his brother-in-law. The whole county government was made up of men who'd fought for the Confederacy and weren't about to see their world change. They buried those bodies in a mass grave and acted like those people never existed. But the families knew and they remembered. And some say she hesitated, then continued. Some say those 23 souls, they didn't rest easy. They wanted justice. And if they couldn't get it from the law, they'd take it other ways. Frank leaned forward. What do you mean? I mean that every generation the Harrington family pays a price. Started with the Colonel himself, died screaming about shadows coming for him. 3 years to the day after the massacre, his son fell from a horse and broke his neck right at the base of that oak tree. His grandson drowned in Cypress Creek, even though he could swim like a fish. Every generation, Sheriff, the debt gets paid in blood. You're talking about a curse. Martha shrugged. Call it what you want. I call it justice delayed, and it ain't done yet. Before Frank could respond, his phone rang. It was Judge Harrington. Something's terribly wrong. David Harrington was the judge's only child, a successful lawyer in Houston who'd come home for a family gathering. Frank had known David since he was a boy, a bright kid who'd grown into a decent man, one who seemed determined to be different from his ancestors. He'd even done pruno work for poor families, something that had caused more than a few arguments with his father. The judge led Frank upstairs to David's childhood room. Emma and Carl had arrived and were waiting in the hallway, their faces grim. Through the door, Frank could hear someone speaking, reciting something in a rhythmic, almost hypnotic cadence. Started about 2 hours ago, the judge explained. He woke up screaming, saying something was in his room. When I got there, he was like this. Frank opened the door carefully. David Harrington sat on the floor in the corner of the room, his knees drawn up to his chest, rocking back and forth and forth. His eyes were open but unseeing, and from his lips poured a stream of names and dates. Samuel Jackson, September 15, 1865. Age 23, hanged from the oak tree. Moses Williams, September 15, 1865. Age 31, hanged from the oak tree. Ruth Patterson, September 15, 1865. Age 19, shot in the back while running. Ezekiel Thompson, September 15, 1865. Age 45, shot in the chest. He's naming them, Carl said quietly. The victims. He's naming all 23 victims. Frank approached David slowly, but the young man showed no awareness of his presence. He just continued reciting, each name followed by age and manner of death. When he reached the last name, little Mary Johnson, September 15, 1865, age 7, shot while her mother tried to shield her. He started over from the beginning. Has he said anything else? Frank asked the judge. Just the names over and over. And Frank, the judge's voice broke. He's never studied our family history. I made sure of that. I kept all those old records locked away. There's no way he could know these names. Frank exchanged glances with Emma and Carl. They just spent hours researching, and they hadn't found a complete list of victims. Yet here was David Harrington, reciting them like a prayer or a curse. Dr. James Raw, the only doctor in Cypress Grove, arrived within the hour. He examined David, checking vital signs, pupil response, looking for any sign of drugs or head trauma. Physically, he's fine, the doctor reported, but this looks like some kind of dissociative state. He needs psychiatric care, probably hospitalization. As they prepared to transport David to the hospital in Tyler, he suddenly stopped reciting. His eyes focused and he looked directly at his father. When he spoke, his voice was different, older, rougher, with an accent that belonged to another century. The debt ain't paid, Harrington. 23 souls for 23 souls. The blood of your line for the blood of ours. Justice will be done. Then David collapsed unconscious. While the ambulance took David to Tyler, Frank found himself back at the station with Martha Reeves, who'd refused to go home. It's starting, she said simply. The excavation disturbed them. The truth is coming out, and they won't rest now until the debt is paid. Martha, I'm a sheriff, not a priest. I deal in facts and evidence, not curses and ghosts. Martha smiled sadly. Sheriff in Jefferson County. Facts and ghosts ain't as separate as you might think. This land remembers everything. Every drop of blood spilled, every life stolen, every injustice covered up. And sometimes, when the conditions are right, that memory demands acknowledgement. Over the next 3 days, things escalated rapidly. The story of the mass grave made state and then national news. Reporters descended on Cypress Grove like locusts, interviewing anyone who would talk. The Harrington family name was dragged through the mud as historians pieced together Colonel Josiah Harrington's role in what was now being called the Judgment Oak Massacre. But the media attention was the least of the problems. On the second night, 3 descendants of the Harrington family, distant cousins who lived in Dallas, Austin, and Shreveport, were hospitalized with the same symptoms as David. Each of them began reciting the names of the victims, despite having no knowledge of the massacre or connection to each other beyond blood. On the third night, it got worse. Frank was called to the home of Peter Harrington, the judge's nephew, at 3 a.m. Peter, a successful businessman who owned half the commercial real estate in Cypress Grove, had barricaded himself in his study. His wife, Jennifer, was hysterical. "He's been in there for hours," she sobbed. "I can hear him talking to someone, arguing, pleading. But, Frank, there's nobody else in there." I looked through the keyhole. "He's alone, but he's having a conversation with someone." Frank could hear Peter's voice through the heavy oak door, high and frightened. "I didn't do it. It was my ancestor, not me. I've never hurt anyone. Please, I have children." Then another voice, deep and resonant, though Frank couldn't tell where it was coming from. "Your children carry the blood. The blood carries the dead. 23 souls for 23 souls." Frank kicked in the door. Peter Harrington stood in the center of the room, surrounded by what looked like shadows that moved independently of any light source. His face was twisted in terror, tears streaming down his cheeks. As Frank watched, frozen, the shadows seemed to coalesce, taking vague human shapes, men, women, and one that was heartbreakingly small, child-sized. "Help me!" Peter screamed, reaching out to Frank. The shadows surged forward, and Peter's scream cut off abruptly. He stood rigid for a moment, then began speaking in that same strange voice David had used. "The courthouse, midnight, bring them all. Every drop of Harrington blood. Time for judgment." Then Peter collapsed, blood running from his nose and ears. The paramedics said it was a massive stroke, probably brought on by extreme stress. But Frank had seen those shadows, had felt the temperature in the room drop 20 degrees in seconds, had heard that voice that seemed to come from the earth itself. Judge Harrington called an emergency family meeting. By some twisted irony, or perhaps cosmic design, there were exactly 23 living descendants of Colonel Josiah Harrington. They ranged in age from David at 30 to little Sarah Harrington Wells, who was only 7, the same age as little Mary Johnson when she was shot in 1865. "This is insane," insisted Robert Harrington, a banker from Houston. "We're talking about going along with some mass delusion. Curses aren't real." "Then explain what's happening to David, to Peter, to the others." The judge counted. He looked haggarded, aged 10 years in 3 days. "I've spent my whole life running from this family's past, pretending it didn't exist. But it's here now, demanding something." Martha Reeves had been invited to the meeting despite protests from some family members. She sat quietly in the corner until asked to speak. "Your ancestor took 23 lives under that oak tree. Those souls have waited 130 years for acknowledgement, for justice. The law failed them in life. Maybe now in death they can find some measure of peace." "What do they want from us?" Jennifer Harrington asked, holding her infant son. "Truth," Martha said simply, "acknowledgement and penance." The decision to meet at the courthouse at midnight on June 18, 1995, exactly 130 years after the massacre, wasn't really a decision at all. It was a capitulation to something that felt inevitable, like trying to stop the tide or hold back the night. All 23 Harrington descendants would be there, along with Sheriff Frank Delqua, Deputies Emma Rodriguez and Carl Washington, and Martha Reeves, who insisted she had a role to play in whatever was coming. Frank had tried to approach the situation rationally. He'd consulted with psychiatrists about mass hysteria, with historians about the psychological weight of ancestral guilt, even with a priest about exorcism and spiritual intervention. But none of their explanations could account for what he'd seen with his own eyes, but the whole town was beginning to witness. And in the historically black section of town known as Freedom Hill, people reported seeing figures in Civil War-era clothing walking the streets, heading toward the courthouse. Emma Rodriguez sat with Frank in his office as they prepared for midnight, going over contingency plans that seemed absurdly inadequate. "Sheriff, what exactly are we preparing for here?" she asked. "A riot? A mass suicide?" "I don't know," Frank admitted, "but I've got a feeling that whatever happens tonight, Jefferson County will never be the same." Carl Washington entered, his face grave. "The Harringtons are gathering at the judge's house. And Sheriff, you should see Main Street. They walked outside to find Main Street filled with people, not the Harringtons, but the descendants of the massacre victims. They stood silently, men and women, elderly and young, all facing the courthouse. Some held candles, others carried old photographs, gerotypes and tin types of faces, long dead but not forgotten. Martha Reeves stood at their head, her cane planted firmly on the ground. "We're here to witness," she told Frank. "Our families have waited 130 years for this night. We won't interfere, but we will not be excluded from justice either." As midnight approached, the fog grew thicker, and with it came sounds, whispers in languages both familiar and foreign, the creak of rope against wood, the echo of gunshots from a war long ended. The streetlights flickered and died, leaving only the moon, full and blood-red through the fog, to light the scene. The Harringtons arrived in a procession of cars, parking along Main Street and walking slowly toward the courthouse. Judge William Harrington led them, his shoulders squared despite the fear Frank could see in his eyes. David, released from the hospital against medical advice, walked beside his father, his face blank and eyes unfocused. The others followed. Men in expensive suits, women clutching designer purses like talismans, teenagers trying to look brave, and children held tight in their parents' arms. They gathered on the courthouse lawn, the Harringtons on one side, the descendants of victims on the other, with Frank and his deputies standing between them, like referees in some cosmic game whose rules no one understood. At exactly midnight, the courthouse clock began to chime, and with each toll the fog seemed to pulse and W. On the 12th chime, silence fell, complete and absolute. Even the wind stopped. Then they appeared. They came from the fog, or perhaps they were the fog, coalescing into human shapes that were almost but not quite solid. 23 figures in the clothing of enslaved people and freed men, their faces bearing the marks of violence. Rope burns on necks, bullet wounds in chests and backs, terror frozen in eyes that had seen death coming and been unable to escape it. The figure at their head was a tall man with dignity intact, despite the spectral rope around his neck. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of all those silent years. "I am Samuel Jackson," he said, and David Harrington's lips moved in sync, repeating the words. "I was 23 years old when Colonel Josiah Harrington murdered me for the crime of being free. I had a wife, Sarah, and a baby daughter, Hope. They never knew what became of me. My body lies in unhallowed ground, my story untold, my death unmourned by any but my own." One by one, the other spirits spoke, each telling their story. Each Harrington descendant compelled to repeat their words, to feel perhaps something of what they had felt. The horror of it was overwhelming. Not just the violence of their deaths, but the lives cut short, the families destroyed, the futures stolen. When little Mary Johnson spoke through 7-year-old Sarah Harrington Wells, her child's voice describing the terror of watching her mother die trying to protect her. Several people in both crowds began weeping openly. "We do not seek your deaths," Samuel Jackson said when all had spoken. "The living are not responsible for the crimes of the dead, but the dead demand acknowledgement. The dead demand justice, and the dead demand change." Judge Harrington stepped forward, his legs shaking but his voice steady. "What would you have us do? How can we, the living, provide justice for crimes committed before we were born?" "Truth," Samuel replied. "First, truth. The real story must be told, taught, remembered. No more lies in your history books. No more Confederate heroes on pedestals. Tell the truth about what built the wealth of this county." The judge nodded. "It will be done. Restoration. The land stolen from our families, the wealth built on our blood. It must be returned to our descendants. Not charity, but justice. What is owed." This caused murmuring among the Harringtons, but the judge raised his hand for silence. "It will be done. And remembrance. That tree, that cursed oak where our body swung, it stands still. As long as it stands, we cannot rest. But do not cut it down. Transform it. Make it a memorial, a place of teaching, a reminder that injustice may be delayed but cannot be denied forever." "It will be done," the judge said for the third time. Samuel Jackson studied him for a long moment, then looked at the other Harringtons. "Will you all swear to this? Will you bind your family to these promises?" One by one, the Harringtons agreed, some reluctantly, others with what seemed like relief, as if a weight they'd carried unknowingly their whole lives was finally being lifted. "Then we accept your oath," Samuel said. "But know this, we will be watching. The dead have long memories and longer patience. Keep your promises, and your family will prosper in peace. Break them, and what you've experienced these past days will seem like gentle whispers compared to what will come." The spirits began to fade. But before they disappeared entirely, something extraordinary happened. The descendants of the victims began to sing, an old spiritual that their ancestors had likely sung in the fields, wade in the water. As their voices rose, the spirits seemed to gain strength, solidifying briefly into fully human forms. For just a moment, the living and the dead stood together, united in song and purpose. Then, between one breath and the next, the spirits were gone. The fog lifted, the temperature returned to normal, and the streetlights flickered back to life. The Harringtons stood stunned, several collapsing to their knees. David Harrington blinked, seeming to come back to himself, and asked his father, "What happened? Why are we at the courthouse?" But not everyone forgot. Frank, his deputies, Martha Reeves, Judge Harrington, and several others retained full memory of the night's events. They would become the keepers of the promise, the ones who ensured the Harringtons kept their word. The transformation of Jefferson County didn't happen overnight, but it began immediately. The morning after the midnight gathering, Judge William Harrington called a press conference that shocked the state of Texas and made national headlines. Standing on the courthouse steps where his family had gathered just hours before, he laid out the truth about the Judgment Oak massacre in unflinching detail. "For 130 years, my family has hidden from this truth," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd of reporters and townspeople. "We've built our wealth and position on a foundation of blood and lies. That ends today." So the judge announced the creation of the Judgment Oak Memorial Foundation with an initial endowment of $10 million from the Harrington family fortune. The foundation would be overseen by a board comprising descendants of both the victims and the perpetrators, with Martha Reeves as its first chairwoman. Its mission to research, document, and teach the true history of Jefferson County, and to provide reparations to the descendants of those who had been enslaved and murdered. The announcement sparked fierce debate across Texas. Some praised the Harringtons for their courage in confronting their past. Others condemned them as traitors to their heritage, with threatening letters and phone calls pouring in from across the South. But Judge Harrington stood firm, and most of his family stood with him. Not all of them, though. Robert Harrington, the Houston banker, refused to participate in what he called collective madness. He claimed the family had been victims of mass hypnosis, possibly drugged, and threatened legal action to protect his portion of the family wealth from being stolen by con artists playing on liberal guilt. 3 days after his very public refusal to honor the promise made to the spirits, Robert, "The children won't stop crying. Please, William, please make them stop." The judge, Frank, and Martha drove to Houston that night. They found Robert's mansion in chaos. Every mirror in the house had cracked in the shape of a hanging tree. Water ran red from the faucets, and the family huddled in the living room, terrified to be alone. Robert's teenage son, Marcus, had begun reciting the names of the victims, just as David had days before. Martha approached Marcus, placing her weathered hand on his forehead. "They're not here to hurt you, child," she said softly. "They're here to remind you. Your father made a promise in your name. Will you keep it?" Marcus, speaking in a voice not his own, replied, "The blood remembers what the mind forgets. The debt passes from father to son until it is paid." Robert, faced with the supernatural torment of his family, finally broke. He signed over a third of his wealth to the foundation and publicly apologized for his attempts to deny the truth. The haunting ceased immediately, though Robert would never fully recover from the experience. He would spend the rest of his life jumping at shadows and sleeping with the lights on. Back in Cypress Grove, the transformation continued. The site of the mass grave was carefully excavated by archaeologists, with each set of remains identified through DNA testing and genealogical research. The descendants of the victims were finally able to give their ancestors proper burials with headstones, bearing their names and stories. The Judgment Oak itself became the center of a memorial park. Rather than cut it down, artists and craftsmen transformed it into a living monument. The names of the 23 victims were carved into its ancient bark, along with words from spirituals and freedom songs. A circular bench was built around its base, where people could sit and reflect on the weight of history. But the most profound change came in the county's schools. The true history of Jefferson County was incorporated into the curriculum, not as a footnote but as a central part of understanding how the community came to be. Students learned about the enslaved people who built the plantations, the violence of Reconstruction, the long struggle for civil rights that continued well into the 20th century. Some white families pulled their children from public schools in protest. Others, though, embraced the change. They understood that acknowledging historical wrongs was not about guilt, but about understanding and healing. Frank Delacroix found himself at the center of these changes. As sheriff, he had to navigate the tensions between those who supported the transformation and those who resisted it. There were vandalism attempts at the memorial, threats against the Harrington family members who were most vocal about reparations, and several incidents of racial violence that Frank suspected were attempts to reignite old hatreds. One night, 3 months after the gathering, Frank was called to the memorial park. Someone had spray-painted swastikas and racial slurs on the monuments. As he surveyed the damage, he felt a presence beside him. Turning, he saw a translucent figure, Samuel Jackson, the spokesman for the spirits. "They will try to make us forget again," Samuel said, his voice carrying on the wind. "They always do, but we will not allow it. This ground has drunk too much blood to forget." "What do you want me to do?" Frank asked, no longer surprised by these supernatural encounters. "Your job, Sheriff. Protect and serve. But know that you protect more than just the living. The dead have rights too. The right to be remembered truthfully. The right to justice, even if delayed. The right to rest in peace once that justice is done." Frank nodded. "I understand." Over the following year, the changes in Jefferson County attracted national attention. Sociologists came to study how a community could confront its racist past so directly. Historians used the extensive records Martha and her team uncovered to piece together a more complete picture of Reconstruction-era violence across the South. The Judgment Oak Memorial became a site of pilgrimage for those seeking to understand America's complicated racial history. But not everyone learned the lesson. Thomas Harrington, a distant cousin who lived in California and had missed the midnight gathering due to a claimed illness, arrived in Cypress Grove on the first anniversary of the massacre's discovery. He was a wealthy tech entrepreneur who publicly declared the whole thing a hoax, a shakedown of a successful white family by race hustlers and poverty pimps. He held a press conference at the memorial, standing beneath the Judgment Oak, denouncing his family's cowardice and promising to use his considerable resources to restore the Harrington name and stop this madness. As he spoke, the temperature began to drop. The bright June day darkened as clouds gathered with unnatural speed. The wind picked up, causing the oak's branches to groan and sway. Thomas ignored these signs, raising his voice over the growing storm. "There are no ghosts," he shouted. "There is no curse. There is only the weak-minded submission to political correctness and white guilt." That's when the rope appeared. It materialized around the oak's largest branch, a noose swaying in the wind just above Thomas's head. The crowd scattered in panic, but Thomas stood frozen as the rope descended slowly, purposefully. It didn't touch him, but circled him like a snake, close enough that he could see it was woven from what looked like human hair. "Do you see us now?" a voice asked, and everyone present heard it. Not Samuel Jackson this time, but little Mary Johnson, the 7-year-old victim. "Do you believe in us now, Mr. Harrington?" Thomas fell to his knees, his arrogance shattered. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, I see you. I believe." "Then you will help us be seen by others. You will use your wealth and influence to spread our story, to ensure it is never forgotten or denied again." "Yes," Thomas sobbed. "Yes, I will." The rope vanished, the storm cleared, and Thomas Harrington became one of the memorial's most generous benefactors. He funded a documentary about the massacre that won an Emmy, established scholarships for descendants of the victims, and never again publicly doubted what had happened in Jefferson County. By 1997, 2 years after the discovery of the mass grave, Jefferson County had become a model for racial reconciliation in America. It wasn't perfect. There were still tensions, still those who resented the changes, but there was progress. The Harrington family had liquidated much of their historical holdings, with the proceeds going to the foundation. The judge retired from the bench, dedicating his remaining years to education and advocacy. Frank remained sheriff, but his job had evolved. He was now not just a law enforcement officer, but a guardian of the covenant between the living and the dead. He regularly walked the memorial park, especially at night, alert for any signs of disturbance, natural or supernatural. Gemma Rodriguez, who had started as a skeptic, became a believer after witnessing a group of spirit children playing beneath the Judgment Oak one moonless night. She would go on to become sheriff after Frank's retirement, carrying on the tradition of protecting both the living and the memory of the dead. Carl Washington used his experience to write a book about the events, though he had to market it as fiction because no publisher would accept it as fact. Still, those who had been there knew the truth, and the book became required reading in Jefferson County schools. Martha Reeves lived to see the 5th anniversary of the discovery, passing away peacefully in her sleep, the night after a celebration at the memorial. At her funeral, attended by hundreds, many swore they saw 23 figures standing at the back of the church, heads bowed in respect for the woman who had helped them find justice at last. But the story didn't end there. 5 years after the discovery of the mass grave, in the summer of 2000, Jefferson County faced a new challenge that would test whether the lessons learned from the Mr. Harrington, that land you're planning to develop contains the graves of over 200 freed men and their families. These are our ancestors, people who built this community with their bare hands after emancipation. Jackson waved dismissively. The cemetery hasn't been used in 80 years. Most of the headstones are relayable. We'll relocate any remains we find, give them a nice new resting place with modern markers. It's an improvement. You can't improve on sacred ground, Angela replied firmly. And given your family's history with the black community in this county, I think you'd be more sensitive to my family's history. Jackson interrupted, his face wreathing, is one of success, leadership, and progress. I won't be held hostage by ancient grievances and imaginary hauntings. That night, Jackson stayed at the old Harrington mansion, which he'd inherited but never occupied. Judge William had moved to a modest house in town after the events of 1995, unable to sleep in a place built with blood money. Jackson had no such guilt into the master bedroom with a bottle of expensive bourbon and blueprints for his development. Frank got the call at 3 a.m. Sheriff Jackson's voice was different. Hi, frightened. All arrogance gone. You need to come here now and bring someone who understands these things. Frank called Angela Reeves and Father Miguel Santos, the local Catholic priest, who had become something of an expert on the supernatural occurrences in Jefferson County. They found Jackson barricaded in the mansion's library, every light in the room blazing, clutching a poker from the fireplace. They're here, he whispered, eyes darting to the shadows. All of them. Not just the 23 from the oak tree. Hundreds. They've been coming all night, rising from the ground, walking through walls. As if summoned by his words, the temperature plummeted. Frost formed on the windows despite the summer heat outside, and then they appeared. Not violently or suddenly, but gradually like fog, condensing into human shape. Men, women, and children in the clothing of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, their faces marked by hard lives and harder deaths. Some bore the signs of violence, others of disease or age, but all shared the same determined expression. A woman stepped forward, elderly but dignified, wearing a faded calico dress. I am Mama Rose, she said, her voice carrying the authority of matriarchs throughout history. I was born enslaved on the Harrington plantation in 1850. I lived to see freedom, to bury my husband in that cemetery you want to destroy, to raise 7 children who are also buried there. We will not be moved again. Jackson tried to speak, but no words came. The poker fell from his nerveless fingers. Mama Rose continued, we were moved from Africa to America, moved from plantation to plantation as property, moved from our first graves when the white cemetery needed expanding. We will not be moved again. But you're dead, Jackson managed to stammer. Dead but not gone, Mama Rose replied. Not while memory persists, not while the ground holds our bones and our blood. Your brother learned this lesson 5 years ago. Your family made promises. You were not there, but the blood remembers. More spirits stepped forward, each telling their story. Emmanuel Washington, killed by night riders for trying to vote in 1868. Sarah Patterson, who died in childbirth because no white doctor would treat her. Thomas Freeman lynched for looking at a white woman. Children who died of preventable diseases because the county hospital was whites only until 1964. This is our history, Father Miguel said softly to Jackson. This is what built Jefferson County. Not just the success stories, but the suffering. Not just the plantations, but the people who worked them. Jackson looked around the room. At the spirits, at the living witnesses, at the weight of history made manifest. What do you want from me? Respect, Mama Rose said simply. The cemetery stays untouched. Build around it if you must, but make it a centerpiece, not an obstacle. Tell our stories. Honor our lives, not just our deaths. And if I refuse, the spirits moved closer, and Jackson felt the weight of centuries pressing against him. Every injustice, every slight, every life cut short. He felt it all, a crushing burden of collective pain that brought him to his knees. Then you will carry us, Mama Rose said. Every spirit displaced by your development will attach to you. We will be your constant companions, your eternal reminder of what you destroyed for profit. You will never know peace, never know silence, never know solitude. We will be with you until you join us, and perhaps after. Jackson looked to his brother, who had arrived during the confrontation. Judge Williams' face was grave, but not unsympathetic. They keep their word, Jackson. I've learned that the hard way. But they're also just honor them and they'll honor you. With shaking hands, Jackson signed a document Angela had prepared, legally protecting the cemetery in perpetuity and committing to building a cultural center that would tell the stories of the freedmen's community. The spirits began to fade, but Mama Rose lingered. You're a Harrington, she said to Jackson. That name carries weight in this county. The weight of sin, but also the potential for redemption. Your brother chose redemption. What will you choose? After they vanished, Jackson sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he spoke. I came here to make money. But maybe I can make something more, something that matters. The development went forward, but transformed. Cypress Grove Commons became Freedmen's Memorial Village, a mixed-use development that preserved and highlighted the historical sites while providing modern amenities. The cemetery was restored with new markers, researched by the Memorial Foundation, becoming a peaceful park at the heart of the complex. The cultural center included a museum, genealogical library, and community spaces for events and education. The development was so successful, both financially and socially, that it became a model for historical preservation and community development across the South. Jackson, transformed by his encounter with the spirits, became an advocate for preserving African-American historical sites throughout Texas. But the spirits weren't done teaching Jefferson County. In 2005, 10 years after the original discovery, Hurricane Rita threatened the Texas coast. While the storm ultimately made landfall further south, the evacuation orders included Jefferson County. As thousands fled, something extraordinary happened at the Judgment Oak Memorial. Frank, now nearing retirement, was doing final checks to ensure the evacuation was complete when he found a crowd gathered at the memorial. Not fleeing residents, but spirits, hundreds of them, more than he'd ever seen before. They stood in concentric circles around the oak tree, their ghostly forms more solid than usual, as if the approaching storm had given them strength. Samuel Jackson stood at the center, his presence commanding even in death. Sheriff Delacroix, he called out. The storm brings more than wind and rain. It brings a test. What kind of test? The storm will pass through here. The flooding will be severe. Many will lose their homes, their possessions. How the county responds, who gets helped first, who gets forgotten, whose neighborhoods get rebuilt and whose get abandoned. This will show whether the lessons we've taught have truly been learned. Frank understood. Natural disasters had a way of exposing societal inequalities. The poor, predominantly black neighborhoods were in the low-lying areas most vulnerable to flooding. The wealthy, predominantly white neighborhoods sat on higher ground. We'll do right by everyone, Frank promised. Samuel studied him. We shall see. The dead will be watching. The hurricane brushed Jefferson County with its outer bands, bringing torrential rain and flooding that devastated the lower wards. As predicted, the historically black neighborhoods bore the brunt of the damage. Freedom Hill, where Martha Reeves had lived, was under 6 ft of water. The newer developments on higher ground saw minimal damage. In the immediate aftermath, Frank worked 18-hour days coordinating rescue efforts. He was pleased to see that the emergency response didn't discriminate. Boats went to Freedom Hill as quickly as to anywhere else. The emergency shelter at the high school treated all evacuees equally. It seemed the county had indeed learned its lessons. But then the rebuilding phase began. Why rebuild in a flood zone? We're offering generous buyouts. Angela Reeves stood to respond, but before she could speak, the lights in the building flickered and died. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in an eerie red glow. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds, and every door in the building slammed shut simultaneously. They appeared gradually, filling every available space. The spirits of Jefferson County's black community, spanning centuries. But this time they weren't alone. Mixed among them were poor white spirits, Latino spirits, even Native American spirits, all the forgotten, marginalized dead of the county's history. At their head stood not Samuel Jackson, but little Mary Johnson, the 7-year-old massacre victim. When she spoke, her child's voice carried the weight of ages. "You learned to acknowledge us," she said, fixing her gaze on Commissioner Stevens. "You learned to memorialize us, but you haven't learned to value us. Dead or alive, black or white, rich or poor, we are all Jefferson County, and we will not be erased again." Stevens tried to bluster. "This is a public meeting. You can't. We are the public," little Mary interrupted. "We built this county, died for this county, and we have more right to speak than you who would profit from disaster." The spirits began to speak, not in sequence, but all at once, a chorus of voices that somehow remained comprehensible. They told of previous floods, previous disasters, and how the poor and black communities had always been abandoned in the rebuilding. They told of promises broken, aid diverted, communities destroyed in the name of progress. "No more," little Mary said when the chorus ended. "You will rebuild Freedom Hill. You will strengthen it against future storms. You will treat every citizen of this county as worthy of protection and support, or we will make this county unlivable for the living." To demonstrate their point, every electronic device in the building, phones, computers, even digital watches, began displaying the same message. Justice for all or peace for none. The vote was unanimous. The redevelopment plan was scrapped, replaced with a comprehensive rebuilding effort that prioritized the damaged communities. Federal disaster funds were distributed equitably. Local contractors from affected communities were hired for rebuilding efforts. Freedom Hill was not only rebuilt, but improved with better drainage, stronger construction, and new community facilities. But the spirit's most profound impact came through a young girl named Destiny Williams, a descendant of Moses Williams, one of the massacre victims. During the rebuilding, 8-year-old Destiny began showing an unusual ability. She could see and communicate with the spirits as easily as with the living. "They're not scary," she told Frank one day as they walked through the memorial park. "They're just sad sometimes. They want to help but don't know how." Under the guidance of Angela Reeves, and with her parents' cautious permission, Destiny became a bridge between the living and dead. Through her, the spirits could communicate more easily, sharing their knowledge and perspectives without the dramatic manifestations that terrified most people. The spirits, it turned out, had much to teach. They knew where old wells were located that could provide water during droughts. They remembered floods and storms patterns going back centuries, valuable data for climate planning. They knew which plants were medicinal, which areas were prone to sinkholes where historical artifacts were buried. Most importantly, they served as living or perhaps unliving memory of the community's history. Through Destiny, they shared stories that had never been written down, songs that had been forgotten, recipes and traditions that connected the present to the past. In 2020, 25 years after the discovery of the mass grave, Jefferson County had become a pilgrimage site for those seeking to understand American history in all its complexity. The Judgment Oak Memorial was now a national historic landmark, visited by thousands each year. Tour buses arrived daily, bringing students, historians, and descendants of both the victims and perpetrators. The Memorial Foundation had expanded its work beyond Texas borders, helping other communities across the South uncover and acknowledge their own hidden histories. They had developed a methodology, part archaeological, part spiritual, part therapeutic, for communities ready to confront their buried truths. Frank Delqua, now 81 and long retired, still walked the memorial park every evening. His knees were bad, requiring a cane carved from wood of a tree that had witnessed the massacre, and his eyes weren't what they used to be, but he maintained his vigil with stubborn determination. The paths through the park knew his footsteps so well that some claimed the ground itself had worn into the shape of his daily route. Emma Rodriguez, now sheriff, often joined him, bringing coffee and updates about current cases. Her own deputies had learned to accept the supernatural as a part of their jurisdiction, even keeping a special log for spectral incidents that no longer raised eyebrows at the state level. The transformation of the sheriff's department itself was remarkable. They had instituted training programs on the county's history, making sure every officer understood not just the laws they enforced, but the historical context that shaped their community. The department's motto, inscribed on a plaque made from stone taken from the mass grave site, read, "To protect, to serve, to remember." Destiny Williams, now 23, had become both a historian and spiritual medium, formally documenting the stories of the spirits with academic rigor and supernatural sensitivity. Her book, Voices from the Ground, The Dead of Jefferson County Speak, had become essential reading in American studies programs nationwide. Despite skeptics dismissing it as fiction, she had developed a unique methodology, combining traditional oral history techniques with her gift for speaking with the dead. The Library of Congress had recently acquired her complete audio recordings, hundreds of hours of testimonies from spirits whose voices had been silenced for over a century. She worked from a small office in the renovated courthouse, its walls lined with photographs of the identified victims, each image painstakingly reconstructed from descendants' features and spiritual descriptions. Visitors often reported that the eyes in these portraits seemed to follow them, not menacingly, but with a kind of patient watchfulness, as if ensuring their stories would continue to be told. Judge William Harrington had passed away 5 years earlier, but not before seeing his family's transformation complete. His funeral had been unlike any other in Jefferson County history, attended equally by black and white citizens, with gospel singers and classical musicians performing together. The Harringtons were no longer the county's wealthiest family, having given much of their fortune to reparations and community development. The Harrington Plantation House had been converted into a museum and reconciliation center, its rooms now telling the intertwined stories of the enslaved and their enslavers. But the family had gained something more valuable than wealth, respect, and genuine integration into a community that had once feared and resented them. David Harrington, the judge's son, had become a renowned civil rights lawyer, using his family name and resources to fight injustice across Texas and beyond. He kept an office in Jefferson County, in a building that had once housed slave auctions, now transformed into a legal aid center, providing free representation to those who couldn't afford it. He often said his possession by the spirits at age 30 was the best thing that ever happened to him. Pharmacy test scores had actually improved as students found meaning and relevance in their education that connected to their lived experience. On the night of September 15, 2020, exactly 155 years after the massacre, Frank sat on the bench beneath the judgment oak. The memorial was usually closed after dark, but he had a permanent exemption, a lifetime pass signed by 3 successive mayors, and blessed, some said, by the spirits themselves. The bench had been placed exactly where the old auction block had stood, a deliberate choice to transform a site of suffering into one of contemplation. As midnight approached, he wasn't surprised to see a familiar figure materialize beside him. Samuel Jackson looked exactly as he had that first night in 1995. The spectral rope still around his neck, but somehow less prominent now, as if the weight of it had lessened. His clothes, once tattered and blood-stained in his manifestations, appeared cleaner, more solid, as if he too had been restored by the acknowledgement of his story. "Sheriff," Samuel said, though Frank hadn't been sheriff for 15 years. The title, Frank understood, was one of respect for the role he had played, not the office he had held. "Samuel," Frank replied, feeling the familiar chill that accompanied spiritual visitation. "Come to check on things. Come to say goodbye, actually." Frank felt a pang of loss he hadn't expected. In 25 years, he had grown accustomed to, even comforted by the presence of the spirits. "You're leaving? Can you leave? We've been held here by injustice, by the need for truth and acknowledgement. That need has been met, not perfectly, but enough. The living remember us now. Our names are spoken in schools and churches, our stories told in books and films. Children who never knew us pray for our souls. The debt has been paid. All of you are going. Most. Some choose to stay to watch over their descendants to help when needed. But the anger that bound us is gone. We can rest now, those who want to. The chains of rage that held us to this place have been replaced by bonds of love and remembrance." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the living and the dead sharing a bench beneath a tree that had seen too much history. Frank could hear the distant sound of the night, crickets a far-off train, the whisper of wind through the memorial's trees. It was peaceful in a way the town had never been before. The truth was revealed. "Will I see you again?" Frank asked. Samuel smiled. The first time Frank had seen any expression on the spirit's face, besides solemnity or anger. It transformed him, made him look younger, like the man he might have been if he'd lived in freedom. "Sheriff, you're 81 years old. I expect you'll be seeing all of us again soon enough." "But not yet. You still have work to do." "What work?" "The same work you've always done. Stand witness, protect the vulnerable, ensure the truth is told. The spirits may be leaving, but the living still need guardians. And there will be other truths to uncover, other injustices to face. Jefferson County has learned to listen to its ghosts, but America has many more that have yet to be heard." As the courthouse clock struck midnight, Samuel began to fade. That touch, Frank felt the weight of all Samuel had endured, but also the peace he had finally found. "Thank you, Frank D'Aqua," Samuel said, "for believing when others doubted, for acting when others feared, for keeping your word when it would have been easier to forget. You gave us back our names." Then he was gone, and with him Frank could sense many others. The air itself felt lighter, as if a pressure that had weighed on Jefferson County for over a century had finally lifted. The temperature seemed to rise a few degrees, and the omnipresent smell of old earth and decay that had hung around the memorial faded. But not all the spirits left that night. Little Mary Johnson appeared one last time to Destiny Williams, telling her she would stay to watch over the county's children to ensure no child would suffer unremembered as she had. Mama Rose remained in the Freedmen's Cemetery, a guardian of the graves and keeper of stories for those who came seeking their roots. And others too chose to remain not as vengeful spirits, but as protectors, guides, ancestors, watching over their descendants with love rather than rage. Frank lived another 3 years, passing away peacefully in his sleep on a summer night in 2023. His last days were spent recording his memories, creating an oral history that would join Destiny's archives. His funeral was attended by hundreds, black and white, rich and poor, young and old. The procession to the cemetery stretched for over a mile. As they lowered his casket, many swore they saw a crowd of translucent figures standing at the cemetery's edge, heads bowed in respect. Some said they saw Samuel Jackson himself place a spectral hand on the casket in farewell. Angela Reeves, now in her 70s, but still sharp as ever, gave the eulogy, ending with words that had become Jefferson County's unofficial motto: "The dead remember what the living forget. May we never forget again." Her voice carried across the cemetery, and some claimed it echoed in ways that suggested other voices had joined hers. The transformation of Jefferson County wasn't complete. Such transformations never are. There were still inequalities, still prejudices, still those who resented the changes. Some families had left, rather than accept the new reality. And occasionally someone would spray paint a Confederate flag on the memorial before being quickly caught and sentenced to community service, maintaining the very site they had defaced. But the foundation had been laid, cemented with truth and blood and the unbreakable word of the dead. The Judgment Oak still stands, now surrounded by a thriving memorial park that extends for 50 acres. School children come to learn, researchers come to study, descendants come to remember, and tourists come to understand. The Visitor Center shows a documentary every hour featuring interviews with Frank D'Aqua, Angela Reeves, and even David Harrington, all speaking honestly about their roles in the revelation and transformation. And sometimes on foggy mornings or moonless nights, visitors report seeing figures beneath the tree. Not frightening but peaceful, like a gathering of old friends who finally found their way home. The spirits had taught Jefferson County a fundamental truth, that the past is never truly past, that justice delayed is not justice denied, and that the dead have voices that demand to be heard. In learning to listen to those voices, the living had found a way forward. Imperfect but honest, painful but necessary, and in the end, that was all the spirits had ever wanted. To be heard, to be remembered, and to know that their suffering had not been in vain. In Jefferson County, Texas, after 155 years of silence, they finally got their wish. The last entry in Frank D'Aqua's journal found after his death read simply, "The debt is paid, the spirits rest. The work continues. May those who come after us remember what we've learned." That truth, however painful, is the only foundation for justice. And justice, however delayed, will not be denied. Jefferson County today is not perfect, but it is honest. The Confederate monuments are gone, replaced with memorials to all who built the community. The schools teach the full history, uncomfortable truths and all. The descendants of slaves and slave owners work together on the Memorial Foundation, united in their commitment to never forget. And sometimes when the conditions are just right, a foggy morning, a moonless night, the anniversary of some long-ago tragedy, the veil grows thin. The living might catch a glimpse of the dead, still walking the streets they walked in life, still connected to the land that holds their bones, but they're not frightening anymore. They're just neighbors, separated by the thinnest of veils, reminding us that in Jefferson County the past is always present, the dead never truly gone, and justice in the end is eternal.